Story 1. A coworker once printed out an Excel spreadsheet, filled it in with a pen, then scanned it and emailed it back saying, "Done editing." I began using cloud technology myself that day. Story 2. Today, my mother was panicking. She believed that her phone had been hacked and that she was locked out of her bank account. She had left her phone on airplane mode. Story 3. A lady came to the internet cafe where I worked with someone's Skype information on a piece of paper. I set her up, plugged in a microphone and camera for her, and so on. The call started, and she said, "Excuse me, they can see and hear me, and I can see them, but I can barely hear them." I looked over and saw she was not wearing the headphones. She was not old, early 20s, about 10 to 15 years ago when Skype was popular. Story 4. We had a new employee at work who needed to complete her online training courses. I helped her log in. She sat down and asked, "What do I do?" I told her to use the mouse to select the next slide button and then answer the questions. She sat silently for about 15 seconds before turning to me and asking what the mouse was. This was a woman in her early 30s, not much older than I was. Story 5. An elderly relative. We sent her a USB memory stick full of old family photos we had digitized so she could view them on her laptop. She had had the laptop for some time and was using it competently to send emails, have messenger conversations, and download and view pictures. We visited a couple of weeks later and asked how she had enjoyed the photos. She said she had tried for hours to get the stick working, but the drive was not appearing where the instructions said it should. We asked if we could try, and she fetched her laptop. We asked where the stick was. She pointed to a drawer. My husband opened the drawer, removed the stick, and inserted it into the USB port. She looked confused. "Oh, do you have to plug it in? I thought it just worked on the Wi-Fi." Story 6. When someone asks, "Is there an application for that?" and is told there is not, the task is viewed as impossible. Story 7. My mother could not understand why her phone was doing things she did not intend. She held it with her whole hand wrapped around it, and her fingers touched the screen. Printed pages of Google search results. Did not understand how to save documents in specific places or retrieve them, despite having files and folders explained to her multiple times and knowing perfectly well how physical files and folders work. Copied text by hand off the screen onto a piece of paper, then transcribed it from the paper into another window. Somehow ran a successful small business in the late 1990s with 0 computers because spending hours in the evening crunching numbers with an adding machine was easier. At this point, my siblings and I are mostly resigned to the fact that she has spent the past 30+ years actively resisting learning how to use a computer, and she is not going to change now. She does not understand cell phone plans either, but that is probably a story for a different time. Story 8. My mom, who I love very much and is otherwise quite intelligent, is gloriously incompetent when it comes to technology. She grew up on a farm with no electricity or running water and did not get these amazing luxuries until she was a teenager. Technology to her has always seemed like some kind of black magic. Examples: the first time she used a mouse, she picked it up and tried to wave it around to make it work. I remotely accessed their laptop once to fix it. She asked if the sticky note on the screen was bothering me. I was 4,500 miles away at the time. I told her it was fine. She bought herself an e-reader. I spent 2 afternoons patiently explaining how it worked, and the very next day I got a phone call asking how to turn it on. I think she used it once, then went back to traditional books. She was shown her house on Google Earth and told my kids to run outside and wave. She called me to say there was a bird chirping in the ceiling. It was the battery for the fire alarm. Story 9. My late grandmother once asked me how it was possible to check my work email from home. She thought you could only access your email on the same computer used to create the email address. Story 10. I was at a work training session for a new program. One woman sat there huffing, groaning, and being very dramatic. After a couple of hours, she said "nope" loudly, but to no one in particular. Then she went to the company website to get information about retirement benefits, filled out some forms, called a travel agency, and wrote her resignation letter. I never saw her again. Story 11. My granddad managed to turn his screen upside down. You had to press 3 keys all over the keyboard at the same time to do it. I will never know. Story 12. My coworker asked me to email the information technology department for him because his Outlook was deleted from his computer. Turns out he fell asleep at his desk while working with his hand on the mouse and dragged the shortcut icon to the trash. He did not know you can open a program from the menu bar. Story 13. A guy I knew from the college dorms called for help because his new personal computer would not turn on. He was pressing the Dell logo like a button. It was not a button. Story 14. Told a user to search the company name to find the official website. The user typed AOL.com into the browser, then typed Google into the AOL search bar, clicked the link that took them to Google, typed the company name literally. The user said, "See, I tried this already. It does not work." Story 15. I had an employee who asked me how to make Microsoft Word move down to the next line. I showed them how to use the Enter key. Someone asked why a computer was not working. When I looked, they just had a monitor, an old CRT, but no PC at all. I had to send someone out to help another person turn on their PC. They were not pressing the power button firmly enough. Story 16. Back in the LimeWire days, my cousin's fiance got on my computer and tried to download some adult content. He ended up downloading 12 bare-naked ladies songs. My cousin wasn't even mad. She thought it was hilarious. I still make fun of him about it sometimes. Story 17. One time, around 11 o'clock the night before Easter, my mom was trying to access an account but couldn't remember her password. I told her to use the forgot password option and that it would email her a reset link. She anxiously asked if that would still work even though it was a holiday. I was confused, and she explained she felt sorry for the workers who had to work the night before Easter. She was imagining some poor employees sitting at their desks, waiting for people to forget their passwords so they could send reset emails. To this day, I retell this story every time someone talks about computer illiteracy because it is so hilarious. Story 18. The employee's desktop was replaced. They claimed they were unable to perform their duties because the new device was not set up properly. I was called to assist. I asked what was wrong because nothing stood out, and I understood all of our production employees' workflows. The issue was with the shortcut icon for the application they use, not the background. Confused, I said I believed it was the same, knowing better than to ask why it mattered. They were visibly upset and using strong language, but after a bit, I managed to understand the issue. The shortcut was not in the exact same spot on the screen as the old desktop. I moved it down one grid space. They tested it and immediately showed relief, thinking it was good now. I suspected they were actually illiterate, but they appreciated me because I always fixed their problems. Story 19. I had a coworker who wanted to learn how to use a computer. I sat him down and started to go through the basic steps to log in. He picked up the mouse and started to use it like a television remote. I said, "No, Steve, the mouse stays on the desk." Story 20. I say, "I sent a link to your phone. Just touch it with your finger, and it will open the podcast so you can listen." They say, "Well, I'm not good with computers. Someone will have to show me." I say, "Just touch it with your finger." They say, "Oh, good. Maybe my son will help me when I go to his house next week." I'm just the worst at technology. I say, "Let's look at it now." "See, just touch it, and it plays." They say, "Oh, thanks. I hope I can remember when I'm home. If not, my son can help me." Story 21. My former manager used to have people request documents so she would print, scan, and email them. Story 22. Back in the time before proper spam filters, my father freaked out because he thought someone was trying to plant illegal material on his computer. He had received one of those adult content spam emails everyone was getting at the time. I had to go into his email settings and apply keyword filters manually so he would stop thinking there was a conspiracy against him. Story 23. When working on a migration project moving people from Windows XP to Windows 7, I encountered someone who had bookmarked the Yahoo search results for the word Google. It was the only way they knew how to access Google. Story 24. A coworker asked me to print out the animated dancing Spider-Man image, but was confused about why it would not move. Story 25. Making basic tech support house calls. I was called to a woman's apartment. As she described over the phone, the small arrow cursor was not in the middle of the screen. So, as any decent technician would do, I came prepared. I even brought a replacement mouse. I walked into the apartment. The window curtains were open, and light was streaming in. It was a very pretty day, bright and sunny. So I sat down at the computer. There was no sign of power. I double-checked the plugs. It was a desktop unit, and there was no power anywhere. There was no clock on her microwave, the television was off, and no light bulbs were turned on. They were in the middle of a blackout. She had called a computer technician to work on an electrical device during a blackout because the mouse pointer was not in the middle of the screen. The screen that did not have power. I still remember that day all these years later. It was a unique experience. Story 26. My friend's husband was trying to turn his wife's desktop computer on to work on a resume, but he was getting really frustrated. He kept pressing the power button, but it would not turn on. He yelled downstairs for his wife, my friend, to come and troubleshoot. It turned out he was turning the monitor on and off and had no idea he needed to turn the actual computer on. He is 34 years old. Story 27. Use O instead of 0 on an Excel table to ensure you have two decimals even when they are 0, like 123.00. Story 28. My father, who is a printed circuit board designer and works on computers daily, was adamant in the late 2000s that Google Chrome was a computer virus. He could not be convinced otherwise. Internet Explorer was the only browser to be trusted. Story 29. I used to teach people how to operate software for high-end quality assurance and quality control equipment. You would think that means working with many engineers, but the region I covered was not the most skilled. More importantly, factories are usually built in small, remote towns so they can exploit the workforce since they are the only employer in the area. The quality control departments are typically neglected and treated poorly, ranking just above janitorial staff. In one of the first classes I taught, there was an elderly woman with white hair who struggled to drive on the road. She had never used computers to inspect the parts her factory produced, relying only on hand tools like calipers and gauge blocks. Her factory had recently purchased one of my brand new $120,000 machines to inspect parts because their customer required it. However, they did not have anyone to program it. Betty, as I will call her, had spent 30 years at the company measuring parts, so she seemed like the ideal person to learn the new technology. The training lasted a full week, but she was stuck on the first day. There was a function in the software she simply could not understand. The difficult action was holding the control key while clicking, or holding shift while clicking. I spent a week trying to teach her how to press and hold one button while clicking another. She could press control and then click, but holding control while clicking was beyond her abilities. Story 30. A woman came up to me in tears. I can't find any of my Excel spreadsheets. They are all gone. She was in payroll, so I was concerned. I went to her computer, and she was clicking frantically. Look, they are all gone. I can't find any of them, and payroll is due tomorrow. Help! You can't find any of your Excel spreadsheets, Susan, because you are in Microsoft Word right now. It was sad to watch her deflate when she realized her mistake. Story 31. This woman was an awful con artist who was extremely tech illiterate. She never learned how to right-click, and she was in a position where she needed to, so she could not move forward. I showed her that all she needed to do was tap the trackpad with 2 fingers. Later that night, she was back on her computer and started screaming at me that I broke it. This was not a casual accusation. She meant it. I went over to see what was happening. She was trying to do a normal click on something using the right-click method. It turned out she did not learn how to right-click that day, and she never learned it even though I showed her and she did it with her own hand. Apparently, that did not mean she learned it. What I showed her did not register in her brain the way normal psychologically healthy people's brains work. After I told her to do a normal click on what she was trying to click, she said, "Don't do that other thing to my computer again." In her mind, showing her how to right-click was me doing something to her computer. Story 32. My sweet old dad was amazed when I taught him about browser tabs. He used to do things that required a verification code by walking all the way upstairs, checking his email on another laptop, getting the code, and then going back downstairs to enter it. He said, "There has to be an easier way to do this." And I told him there absolutely was. I love that old guy. Story 33. My dad still uses Microsoft PowerPoint for everything. He made a website for his new business and used Google Sites, but each page was just a single slide as an image. I tried to explain that machines cannot read text on an image that way. He argued that he could read it just fine on all of his devices. I asked him to search for basic keywords on his site, and when it returned 0 results, he finally understood. I still cannot believe he thought designing a website was that easy and that he outsmarted the whole technology industry. Story 34. I used to do technical support for a university and received a phone call from a professor in the chemistry department. His computer was not turning on. I performed some troubleshooting, such as checking that all cables were plugged in and the power was turned on at the wall, trying a different wall outlet, and so on. I concluded that the power supply had failed. I asked the professor for the asset number, which is a sticker on the front of the device, so I could arrange for someone to retrieve it. He said, "I can't give you that." I found that strange and asked why not. He replied, "The lights are off, so I can't read the number." I asked, "Can you turn the light on?" He said, "No, there is a power outage in the building." I responded, "Sir, your computer runs on electricity." This supposedly very intelligent professor, who used his computer for chemical modeling and similar tasks, had no idea it required power to operate. After hanging up, I wondered if I had fallen for a bad technical support joke. Story 35. A colleague yesterday could not figure out why her emails were not working. She did not even realize that the issue was her internet was not connected. Story 36. Not even illiteracy, when people have instructions right in front of them and they do not read them and ask for help. Story 37. A former coworker unplugged her computer for the weekend because we were expecting bad weather. On Monday, she wasted about half a day waiting for the information technology team to come plug it back in because she could not figure it out, despite being the one who had done it in the first place. Story 38. My mother-in-law cannot figure out how her Roku works and needs help all the time. It is one of the simplest interfaces I have ever seen. Saying she is not good with technology is an understatement. She cannot figure out how to check her bank account online despite me showing her many times. She calls the bank and listens to every transaction being read back to her. Story 39. I hired someone with a doctorate who could not understand that he had his work employer email as well as an email from the company we were contracting with. He kept telling me, "But I already have an email account." He couldn't fathom that you could have more than one email account. Also, he is in his 30s, not even old. Story 40. My brother used to work at Geek Squad. One time, an older woman asked him if her iPod would get heavier if she added more songs to it. Story 41. Back in the 1990s, I did some information technology side work for a church. The pastor there believed computer viruses were living things that crawled over phone and electrical wires. He called me once, saying everything was infected, but it was just a burned-out light bulb in his desk lamp. Story 42. Work in a call center. Here are 2 examples. 1. The customer said I would have to mail the form to Florida because their New York email would not work there. The customer, when asked if she had an email, replied, "No, but I have a Gmail. Would it work?" Story 43. A family friend worked at a place where the owner would print emailed orders, enter the details into the accounting software, print the packing slip, scan it back onto the computer to print a copy, and store it in a filing cabinet. When the owner retired and sold the business, the new owner asked my friend to clean out 6 filing cabinets full of packing slip copies. This was in 2019. Story 44. At a place where I worked, you could rent computers. A man was trying to shrink a photo. He would zoom out, hold a ruler up to the screen to see if it was the right size, then save the file. Surprisingly, when he reopened the file, it returned to its original size. Story 45. A coworker had a habit of making up her own 3-letter file name extensions. She did not understand that this is how a computer determines the file type and which application to use to open it. I kept having to export her files just to see their format so I could figure out the correct application. Eventually, I realized that someone was going to have to educate her. That is when fate nominated me to be that person. Well, we all had to start somewhere. Story 46. I had two people trying to retrieve some files we needed. They went into the office but could not find the files anywhere. I told them the files should be on the computer. Suddenly, they started banging and shaking the computer as if trying to get inside it physically. They were exhausting but good-hearted. Story 47. I had a 5th grade class in the mid-1990s. One of my brightest and most well-behaved students put a floppy disk into my microwave, thinking it was for popcorn. There was no malice involved. I was helping students with the writing process during center time when my microwave in the back of the room blew up. It sounded like a lightning storm, but it was not good. Some of my colleagues disliked me for years because my principal forced the removal of microwaves from teachers' classrooms. At the time, the South Bronx, where my school was located, was so dangerous that it was impossible to go out for lunch. A microwave in the corner behind the teacher's desk was a treasured luxury. The joke was on them because a couple of years later, my principal had all teachers' desks removed from the room because she objected to teachers spending any time not interacting directly with students. Story 48. I wrote step-by-step instructions for a task. The person was confused by my instruction to go to a website. Apparently, I needed to explain that he had to type the uniform resource locator into the address bar and press enter. Story 49. A receptionist overstated her qualifications on her resume and forwarded an email to a coworker by opening a new email and retyping the entire message she needed to forward. Story 50. My dad grew up in farmland and did not work with computers at all. When he got laid off and had to apply for benefits, he needed to use a computer, so he asked me to show him a bit. His first task was to move the mouse. He picked it up quickly. I slowed down the instructions at that point. Story 51. One time, this guy asked to use my computer. I said, sure. So he sat down and said, hello, computer. I do not know what kind of computer this guy was used to, but this one does not work like that. I told him to just use the mouse. He picked it up, held it to his lips, and said, hello, computer. Then I said, just use the keyboard. Story 52. My dad had to move into a nursing home and took his voice assistant device with him. He says that over there, it will not play the same songs. Story 53. My mother turns off her mobile data thinking it will save her money. Naturally, it becomes difficult to reach her. Story 54. My mom was in a total panic last summer when several family members were visiting from out of state. She could not get her computer to work no matter what she did. The person assigned to sleep in the office had turned off her monitor so the weird screensaver would not keep them awake. Story 55. My mother, I love her, but if she minimizes the window, if she somehow opens a new tab, if the icon for the browser is not on the desktop, if the personal computer is on and the monitor is off or vice versa, if it is a trackpad instead of a mouse, she doesn't know what to do and freaks out. Story 56. I was taking a new hire through onboarding forms on my computer when she started tapping my monitor. I said it is not a touchscreen and to use the mouse and keyboard. She looked at the desk then at me and said, what is the mouse? She was 19 and this was in 2018. I asked how she did not know what it was, and she explained that every device she had ever used was a touchscreen and that she had never had to use one before. Story 57. My dad is known for having ambitious ideas, usually about making money, that never get off the ground and, thankfully, stay completely in his head rather than affecting anyone's finances. He had an idea for an online video game at some point. I do not really remember what it was. Maybe chess? He had a far-fetched idea about a new variant of chess that nobody was interested in and might have decided to go digital with the concept. Or it might have been something else entirely, probably something much bigger than chess. I have no idea at this point. Anyway, being a teenager, I was familiar with video games, and he asked me for some advice to get things started. I was not interested, so I do not remember much of the conversation, but one part left a lasting impression on me. I suggested that since it was a multiplayer game, By the end of the project, he would need to rent a server to run things. At this point, he stopped and asked, "What is a server?" At that moment, I knew the conversation was over. Story 58. In the Navy, we had a warrant officer take over for information technology who did not know much. We were underway, and this person randomly wanted a printout of every job being run on the system. It did not make any sense because the number was always changing. Some jobs we ran multiple times, and some jobs were large but only ran once. It was also a large amount of raw data that took up an entire line printer, slowing our work to a crawl and using about 5 boxes of high-speed laser printer paper. It was a huge waste of time and resources with no benefit since the data changed before half of it was printed. I am pretty sure the report went straight into the trash. Story 59. The President of the United States promoting electric cars on the White House lawn said, "Everything is computer now. Everything. You look at this car, computer. You look at your phone, computer. Everything is computer." Story 60. When I told someone I was training that the file was on the desktop, she started looking around the actual desk. Story 61. When our hospital transitioned to an electronic medical record system, I watched one of my older colleagues, who was thankfully nearing retirement age, try to put the mouse on the computer screen. Story 62. I had a coworker who had been working there for about a year ask why her password kept turning into asterisks when she was trying to log on. Story 63. My biological father confuses internet searches and social media posts. He is interested in the cost of sex workers in different states. He also searches for adult content. He is over 70 years old. Story 64. In the 1990s, I taught Microsoft Office programs to people sent by their employers. Many of them were coming from keyboard entry jobs and had not used Windows 95. One man insisted he was not right-clicking even though he was getting the pop-up menu. He had moved his finger to the right side and did not look before insisting to me that he was not doing that. One woman became so involved in learning how to delete files in the sample folders that she deleted so many files she had to move seats because her computer stopped working properly. My friend watched someone place a magazine on the side of the desk so he could continue moving the mouse cursor where he wanted. Now the doozy. I showed the group how to remove the ball from the mouse and how to clean the rollers so the mouse would not skip. One woman took the ball, looked at the monitor, said softly, "What happens now?" and rubbed the ball on the mouse pad. Story 65. My father was completely computer illiterate. He had no interest in technology beyond a television. He needed help with any and all technology. It would have been cute if it were not so very annoying. Story 66. I mean, there is technically a small computer inside of it. I have guests on a daily basis who cannot operate a hotel door lock. It's really fun when they get offended after trying to blame the key card. Then I walk them down and use that exact same card to let them into their room. Story 67. I had someone at work who was not sure where an Excel file I had made was located. Okay, no big deal. This person only ever opened files sent to her by email and did not understand the difference between a file and a folder. By extension, she had no idea that File Explorer existed. When I tried to direct her to it, she could not because she did not understand what I meant by the start menu. This person had worked there for easily 20 years. I understand not growing up with technology, but that level of unawareness is still surprising to me 10 years later. Story 68. There is an old joke about a Southern lady in a computer class being told to type RUN, but she kept telling the teacher it was not working until he checked and saw she was typing RUN. My mother-in-law is inept at using technology. She bought a new iPad, and part of the setup process involves transferring data by aiming its camera at the old iPad while the old iPad displays a swirling image. After two 2-hour phone calls, I still had not succeeded in explaining how to aim the new iPad's camera at the old screen while the pattern was visible. I ended up having to ask her to go to the Apple Store. My mother-in-law also thinks that her iPhone's touch identification is her password. We keep telling her she needs to remember her bank password and keep it secure, but she says, "I do not have a bank password. I use my finger instead." Story 69. We were doing training for a retail job and setting up our account on the computer. When we were told to type in a personal identification number for our account as the next step, she inexplicably turned to the office phone next to the computer and typed in the numbers there. She was confused why it did not work. I was baffled. Story 70. Hey Jim, come here for a second. How do you make a copy from the computer like a second paper? Explain how to use the public printer. No, that's not it, Jim. I'm trying to make another piece of paper I can carry around with me. Try to explain it again. That's not what I'm trying to do, though. How can I put a piece of paper in this USB stick my grandson gave me? Oh my God. Here it comes again. Story 71. I work in information technology more than I care to share. One of the worst instances was a chief-level employee opening a new instance of Outlook every time he wanted to check his email. Then he would get mad because his laptop was slow. One of my favorites was a person submitting a ticket because his touchpad was not working. When I arrived, he was eating pizza. The touchpad was covered in grease. Story 72. A coworker said that all her emails were being cut off at the bottom. She did not know that she could scroll. Story 73. I once attended a one-day course that included a diverse mix of professions, including an older tradesman who presumably had never needed to use a computer for work or school. The final portion of the course was computer-based. 5 minutes in, he had to ask the instructor for help because he did not know how to type a capital letter. Story 74. A sales representative for a business our company was working with could not successfully send an email to the address we provided over the phone. It was supposed to be the equivalent of John Smith at, but he kept trying Jan_Smith at. Story 75. The head of the cybersecurity department in Japan has never used a computer. Story 76. My engineering manager would print emails that he wanted to forward to us. We would then pass them around and write our initials on the paper to prove we read them. Maybe it was his way of keeping track. Story 77. A relative of mine would unplug his computer directly from the socket to turn it off. I am amazed that the device lasted 4 years with hardly any problems. Story 78. Back in the early 2010s, I started a job as a collections agent. One of the colleagues I was hired with had plenty of experience working for collections agencies, but mainly with pen and paper. This was a state job and all of our tools were online. During training, he asked questions like, "So, this email thing, when you send one, is your name attached to it?" He always had the slowest times because he couldn't internalize any procedures involving the computer, which unfortunately was most of them. My supervisors gave him as much help as they could and kept trying until there was 1 week left of our 6-month probationary period. Then they had to let him go. He was a nice guy, just completely lost around technology. Story 79. I worked in a library for about 2 years, and the most annoying part of my job was helping people use the public computers. One day, a woman came in and asked me to help her access her email. She had sat down at a public computer and clicked the Microsoft Outlook icon, as in the desktop Microsoft Outlook app. I told her, well, first I would recommend using an internet browser. It is just a bit easier to navigate than using the Microsoft app. This woman looked me dead in the eye and said, I don't want the internet. I want my email. Another time, a woman got frustrated with me because I couldn't reset her Gmail password. She had set her recovery email to the email that she couldn't remember the password to, so she was stuck in an endless loop, unable to access it. She asked me to reset the password, and I told her I couldn't do it. She said, why not? You reset the password on my library card all the time. Story 80. My aunt typed into the Chrome browser on her phone, Google, show me my photos. Because she had an Android device with the Google Photos app installed, the app would open and display her photos. She thought this was the only way to see them. Story 81. A graduate school computer science teacher had to ask a student how to right-click during a Java graphical user interface graduate course. He used a Macintosh computer his entire career. He received his Doctor of Philosophy degree in 1977. Story 82. My grandparents, who recently passed away in 2020 and 2025, did not know how to turn a computer on. They literally did not know what a power button was or how to use it. They did not have a computer, but they did have a basic cell phone and a television with a cable box. If the cable box and television power got out of sync, they would say, "My TV is broken." The cable remote was set up so that when the power button was pressed, it sent a power switch signal to both the television and cable box, meant to turn them both on or off at the same time. But if the television was on and the cable box was off, pressing power would turn off the television and turn on the cable box, and then pressing again would turn on the television and turn off the cable box. This caused there to never be a picture. I would tell my grandfather, "You need to press the power button on the television." "No, not on the remote, on the television itself." "No, that is not going to work. You need to get up and press the button on the side of the television." "No, you need to find the button that says power." There were many other issues, such as not understanding that you cannot put decorations in front of the remote receiver. Throughout high school, he would call me saying, "My television is not working. Walk me through it." It was so frequent that my mother told him, "You have to learn how to use your television. He is going off to college soon, where he will be working hard and cannot have you calling every day to walk you through the same problems every week." They also had a VCR DVD player after the VCR broke. But my grandfather did not know how to use it. We grandchildren knew how to use it and would rent movies from the video store when we stayed over. One time we left a DVD in the player and he had to turn it on, open the disc tray, take out the DVD, close the disc tray, and turn off the unit. You would think we were asking him to defuse a bomb based on how confused he was. I would say, "Press the power button, the button that says power." "Yes, it is a big button. It says power on the left. Now press the open/close button. It should be right next to the DVD tray. There it is." Once, while setting up the cell phone voicemail, we practiced by calling from across the room, letting the phone ring, and then leaving a test message to play back. My grandfather asked, "Why are you doing this? It is a waste of time to call the phone and leave a message when you can just walk over and talk to them." He thought the purpose of voicemail was to leave a message for someone in the same room with you, not for receiving messages when the person was unable to answer. He had an answering machine on his landline phone and used it regularly. They also did not use their phone for texting. Whenever the phone carrier sent them an informational text message, they would call my mother or me in a panic, saying, "There is a weird X on my phone. Is it not working?" I would explain, "No, that is just a text message. I will read it so the notification goes away." My grandmother liked to leave her clamshell phone open in her purse because that way I can hear it when it rings. But then she would get frustrated when she missed calls. I demonstrated that when the phone is open, the ringer is softer, so it does not scream in your ear. I called her with the phone closed and then with the phone open to show that closed was louder. She said, "But it covers the speaker for the ear, so it must be muffled and quiet." Story 83. I once encountered a computer engineer who was arrogant enough to build his system himself without any prior knowledge, but made such serious mistakes that I felt like strangling him. He applied thermal paste on the CPU socket. He did not even connect the fan because he apparently did not need extra cooling. When someone says computer engineer, know that they usually refer to the specific skill of writing and running programs and related knowledge. They know nothing about other areas of computers, including hardware, current trends in components, video games, and so on. Story 84. I know someone who owns a cybersecurity firm but does not know what iMessage is or how websites work. He owns an iPhone. I have read his credentials and they look dubious to me. He allegedly has a cybersecurity credential from Harvard. However, he has been in business for decades and appears frequently as a subject matter expert on local news. Story 85. A new janitor started working at the school where I work. I am in information technology, so it is my job to get him logged on. I asked him to log into one of our desktops to reset his password for the first time. He proceeded to pull out a flip phone to retrieve his password and looked me straight in the eye, asking how to use a computer mouse. Story 86. My coworker was promoted to a liaison position because he spoke Spanish, but they later discovered he could not send an email. This happened in 2009. Story 87. A remote user rebooted their machine 3 times within 15 seconds. It turns out they were just turning their screen off and on again. Story 88. I work in technology support. I once told someone to open a new tab in Google Chrome. She did not know how to do that. I thought surely she was lying or misunderstood me, so I asked again, "You do not know how to open a new tab in Google Chrome?" She did not. Her coworker had to help her. Story 89. My supervisor did not know that it was possible to select multiple files to move. She has been moving files one at a time every day for almost 10 years. Story 90. One of my employees would hit the caps lock key, type a letter, and then remove caps lock every time they needed a capital letter. They did not know that holding the shift key would capitalize a letter. Story 91. I watched a professor of communication in a digital media capstone class literally search for the word Google in front of the entire class to get to the Google search page and then search for something. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Story 92. We had a system update that logged a coworker out of the Remember Me feature. She could not log in and insisted she did not have a username. Story 93. My grandpa thought that Google Maps was a live view. I found him checking his summer home in Michigan during the Christmas break to see if the snowplow workers had cleared his driveway. I kindly told him it was not live. He did not believe me. When I pointed out that the picture showed a date and time it was taken, and that there were sailboats and jet skis on the lake, it proved my point. Story 94. We hired someone as an administrative assistant who had 4 years of experience. She could not turn on her computer. Maybe it was just different from what she was used to. After opening Word to prepare a letter, she walked over and asked me how to delete a line. She provided false references from her parents' business. I was a junior employee earning half her salary. They asked me to train her. I declined and resigned immediately. I was not willing to help someone entitled earn double my salary. Story 95. About 20 years ago, I was helping a man set up his new personal computer. He had thrown away all of the installation disks for Microsoft Office and his other applications years earlier, after installing them on his old computer, because he thought they were no longer useful after installation. Story 96. My clients liked sending me messages written in the subject line of an email. Another client wrote me an email asking me to resend it because her computer had lost it. Story 97. My former boss and his secretary were both quite old, but for work purposes they had to use computers. He usually did the first draft, printed it out, made amendments in pen, and gave it to his secretary to type in the changes. She would print it out, he would make more amendments in pen, and give it back to her, repeating this process many times. He was someone who liked to make many drafts. I don't want to get into how they transferred files to each other, but one of their partners told me that 45 megabytes is a lot of space and enough for our individual email. What really baffled me was their efficiency. The documents required many footnotes for references, and this is how his secretary handled the footnotes. A. She manually typed the number, for example, 1 for the reference, then selected that number with her mouse and made it superscript. B. She manually typed another 1, superscripted at the bottom of the page. The footnotes were in the main body of the page. She did not use the footer function in Word. This was already unusual, but as I mentioned, he made many amendments. Each time he made a change, she had to manually update every single footnote number, incrementing or decrementing all the numbers after the change. Additionally, she had to readjust every page because the footnotes were part of the main body at the bottom of each page. I was shocked and tried to teach her how to use the footnote function, but she said it was too complicated and returned to her old method. Story 98. In rural Appalachia around 2000, I had to take an introduction to computers class. Local businesses were also sending their employees to acquaint them with computers. They could not even turn one on. I became the unpaid teaching assistant for that class. Story 99. Not necessarily illiteracy, but my grandmother, who was in her mid-80s at the time, once called me saying the screen on her MacBook was broken. I came over later and saw that the whole screen had gone photonegative, like someone had activated the invert colors filter in Photoshop, except it was the entire screen on every app. After about 30 minutes of checking, I discovered that there is a hotkey in macOS, I believe it was Mavericks at the time, that toggles inverting the screen colors. It was a 4-key combination, and her cat, who was known for walking on the keyboard, must have accidentally pressed it. Pressing it again fixed the issue immediately. To this day, I wonder why that option exists. It was not a high contrast setting for accessibility. It was literal color inversion. The shortcut still exists: Control, Option, Command, and 8, but requires an accessibility setting to be enabled. So either she had somehow turned that on, or older versions did not have that step. Story 100: Me at Home. In the late 1990s, I got a personal computer that became the family computer. I bought it for games and downloading movies, but everyone used it. I downloaded a virus from Kazaa at 11 p.m. It turned every icon on the desktop into inappropriate thumbnails. The mouse icon became a small image that made noise whenever I tried to click something. I was not even trying to download inappropriate content. I knew when I left for work the next day, either my mother or father would use the computer, so I needed to fix it. Hours passed, and I finally found the startup program causing the issue at 5 a.m. I had to get up for work at 6:30 a.m. and went to that shift feeling exhausted. My old job. At my work during one of the World Cups, a spreadsheet was circulated via email. If you clicked on a nation's flag, it showed inappropriate content from that country. Then someone mistakenly forwarded that email to all their contacts, including management and human resources. Caused a major problem. The person who made the mistake was found, but then others involved in forwarding it were also disciplined. Security showed up at desks with boxes, and people were told to log out and leave. It was a harsh situation. Story 101. Not sure if this counts as illiteracy or something else, but it's a good story. I had a meeting with my boss one morning. He is an older, very posh, and very strange character. He constantly has his tablet with him everywhere he goes. That morning, I was meeting him at his house, and we sat down at the table so he could show me an article he wanted me to read. He took the screensaver off the tablet, and the page with the article was open, but the tabs along the top of the screen had about 10 pages of explicit adult content open in the background. The tab titles were some unpleasant material. I was doing everything I could not to laugh, but he seemed totally oblivious. That was the day I learned that Posh Thomas was deeply into explicit adult content featuring African American performers. Story 102. I once overheard a coworker in the cubicle next to mine, someone who was earning much more than I was, exclaim, "My C drive is full? I don't even have a C drive." Story 103. A person I worked with a couple of years ago was probably in their 30s or early 40s but could do very little with their computer. They didn't know how to use bookmarks or email, always had many open tabs, and complained about the computer being slow. They couldn't find any programs or applications. It wasn't a big deal at first. They seemed a little young to be this tech illiterate, but I didn't mind helping. The real issue was that the illiteracy was a choice, not even a strategic one. They believed they couldn't understand computers and refused to put any effort into learning. This attitude affected other areas of growth and personal development as well. They always had things to complain about and frequently left the copier jammed in the middle of a print job. They did not stay very long. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.